I mean, I've always collected things for
Yeah.
that same kind of
Yeah.
reason, and I've had weird collections when I was in grade school. I collected hats, but not just like caps. I had like a fireman's hat, and I had a beaverskin top hat, and I had like a Chicago Crossing Guards hat, like, and I had them hanging in my bedroom in the house where I grew up, which is still there.
Like a real fireman's hat? Oh.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh my God, the life, like, and it was a worn fireman's
Yeah,
hat.
that's really interesting.
And they're all in my bedroom. And it was like all these, and it didn't really occur to me that all these people are in my bedroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't occur to me till later. And I think if it had occurred to me, they'd have been down immediately because it's really creepy.
Backtrack a little bit
Yeah.
because I wanted to talk about Vivian.
Yeah.
I'd love to know just about like your interest in this woman because you wrote your first book about this incredible story.
Yeah.
So what does this story mean to you and how did it come into your life?
Only book. I'm never writing another book. I'll do something else. So this is interesting because the way I got involved in the Vivian Maier story is through a television station that came to Northwestern's media relations department looking for an expert, because that's what they do. And there's like, we all have our little biographies of what we're good at, and if someone's looking for a soundbite. So they came to the chair of my department, who at that time was Lane Relier, looking for somebody to comment on the critique of Vivian Maier, that her work was derivative of other photographers of her contemporaries, that she was a copycat. And I actually had taken a class to the Cultural Center to see the first Vivian Maier show that was launched in Chicago. And so I was kind of there at ground zero.
Yeah.
I actually also saw one of her shows closing in New York, and it was mobbed by people. And this was 2012. And her story started in actually 2010 was the big show at the Cultural Center. And Chicago's public television station had done a show on her then, and in the next following 2 years, there was just this huge launch.
Yeah.
And so they were revisiting the story and talking about what had just happened, and it was a show that was called The Meteoric Rise of Vivian Maier. And so they came to my office on campus for a soundbite on what I thought of this critique. And I had a couple weeks to prepare, and the first thing I did was start researching her. And the first thing I saw was that there were hundreds of her photographs online, which even for photographers, especially of her period, you can't find that much of their work online. So all of a sudden, her work looked different. I found different things just because I have this research practice. I found a picture of her standing in front of the Museum of Modern Art with Salvador Dali, which placed her there at that time. I looked up MoMA's exhibition record and their press releases and learned what show was at MoMA while she was standing there, and it was a show called For French Photographers, and I put together her story. I did her genealogy. I learned that her mother came from France and her I did all of this research. So they show up at my office with the video camera and the interviewer to answer that question, and they ended up leaving an hour and a half later and extended the show into a 2-part program. And the second part was called Searching for Vivian Maier, not Finding Vivian Maier, which was the movie. So on that program, I demonstrated my research. So I had printed out this map of Manhattan. I started plotting her photographs on the map. I'm starting to follow in her footsteps to understand the way that she's thinking and how she's working. And I'm talking about her as a photographer, which is, up to that point, she was the mysterious nanny.
Yeah.
And nobody could believe that she had this photo practice. And I'm like, I don't find it unusual that she didn't show her pictures to anybody. I don't find it unusual that she did this her whole life. And so I became this kind of lone voice.
Yeah, support, right? That's how the internet seems to frame it, is that there was kind of a narrative about this woman and that you really broke it down. And it seemed like a lot of that came by the way that her work kind of fragmented all over the place and people controlled the narrative in different ways.
Which is not the story that's told.
Right.
So one guy got to sort of form the narrative because he owned the bulk of the work. But there was so much moving around of that. So I started giving talks called Vivian Maier's Fractured Archive. Anyhow, after the public television piece ran, the second major Maier collector invited me over to his studio, because one of the things that the narrator said in voiceover at the end of the episode is what Pamela Bannos would really like is to see Vivian Maier's proof sheets so she could follow her as a student, blah, blah, blah. So he called me the next day or contacted me and invited me to come look at proof sheets that he had. So I went to his studio, which was literally like a Vivian Maier factory where they were making. It was like production mode. And he sent me home with a hard drive of his entire collection, which I spent the next 2 years sorting, because they were all disjointed. There were no dates. There were some dates, but they were all individual frames, so there was no continuity.
Sure.
So I ended up, like the Street Corner Project, sorting them geographically, chronologically, and the book took 5 years to put together. And so there was a third major collector who ended up sharing his collection with me, and I started trying to aggregate her collection. This was the same way I sort of aggregated all the information on that street. So based on, I made this chart where I sort of followed where her work went and then like skyrocketed that way. Interesting sidebar, right now on eBay, somebody who bought 1,200 of her negatives back in 2008, when John Maloof was selling them to like raise cash to develop her film, which is just also funny. They're for sale on eBay right now. Like right now. Like a guy who's had them for 13 years has them online. There's nothing you can do with them because the story just went haywire. Because nobody had the right to publish in the first place. Which is also part of the book that I wrote. The behind the scenes, how did this happen? How did she become the mystery? Who gets to tell her story? And I asked all these hard questions. So it was a tough journey, that one.
It's been mentioned to me before by professors, and I think that it really hits home for me as I've taken these classes. I've really been informed by my peers and the work that they make. I was talking to Professor Allison Wade. I took a sculpture class with her last quarter, and this is something that she emphasized, and she found that in her experience when she was going through art school, what really stuck out to her was like being able to see somebody go throughout their practice and develop it, and that had a much bigger effect than looking at somebody's work that had been published, which makes complete sense to me. There's this really this thing about exploring art and exploring a medium with people that just makes you excited to follow what they end up doing.
Yeah, and I feed off, but I don't feed off the work my students do. I feed off their energy and their freshness. Like I'm 62 years old. I'm actually the oldest faculty member in my department.
No way.
And I don't have tenure because I'm on a different track. I'm on a teaching track. So the reason I'm still in my department is because student evaluations, literally, when I go for up for reappointment or up for promotion, they query random students in my class.
Really?
They go to my class list. I have to get recommendations from my students. It's the weirdest thing. It just really completely feels backwards. But the students are the only people who know what goes on in the classroom.
Yeah.
And so I don't think students really appreciate how important those C-texts are and the way that they're used. I know you use them to see, like, what class do I want to take? And you only see the extremes. This class sucked, and this is, like, the best thing that ever happened to me. Like, simultaneously. You'll see that
that's
in the
so
same class. And you don't hear, like, all of
the
the people that just sort of, went along.
The people that just hit submit and didn't write anything.
Yeah, especially. Or didn't submit anything, because they look at the percentage. So it's a strange thing, but that's why I'm still here, because that's the only way they know what's been going on in my classroom.
It doesn't surprise me that you've had support from your students, though, I have to say.
Well, thank you. I just get so excited about whatever I'm doing.